Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The death toll continues to mount as Russian forces push their way further into the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. Ottawa's announced an extra $2 billion to help clear up surgical backlogs caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have the details. And Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas is the latest Conservative politician to speak out against the Liberal NDP coalition.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Officials in Ukraine say the death toll from a strike on a theater last week in the besieged city of Mariupol has reached close to 300 people. That makes it the deadliest single attack since Russia's war started a month ago. Ukrainian President Zelensky has called on Ukrainians to keep up their resistance to Russia's invading forces, insisting his nation is getting closer to victory each and every passing day. Ukraine has accused Moscow of taking hundreds of thousands of civilians to Russia so they could be used as hostages, while Russia says they've been going on their own free will. A number of homes were destroyed as Russia continued its relentless shelling of Kharkiv and other Ukrainian cities. Officials say more than 2,000 civilians have died since the war with Russia began almost a month ago. The United Nations also estimates that more than 6.5 million Ukrainians have now been displaced since the Russian attack on Ukraine. The United States and the European Union announced a new partnership to reduce Europe's reliance on Russian energy. U.S. President Joe Biden says this initiative will only further isolate Moscow and stop funding Russian President Vladimir Putin's war.
The United States and the European Union are going to work together to take concrete measures to reduce dependence on natural gas, period, and to maximize the availability and use of renewable energy. We're going to accelerate widespread adoption of energy-efficient technologies and equipment like smart thermostats, work to electrify heating systems all across Europe. We're going to invest in innovative solutions and technologies to make the switch from fossil fuels. And together, we'll advance the use of clean and renewable hydrogen to reduce our carbon emissions.
Even though 2 broadcast studios were damaged in Ukraine by Russian attacks, the news teams there are trying everything in their power to stay on the air. FEBC senior broadcaster Sergei Nakul says they're seeing incredible opportunities to share the gospel message with their listeners.
Just a few months ago, FEBC Ukraine was celebrating the opening of their new radio studios in Kyiv in Ukraine. However, since the Russian invasion, their staff has overcome overwhelming challenges to stay on air, including damage to 2 of their 7 Christian radio stations. But their senior broadcaster, Pastor Sergei Nakul, says they are seeing amazing miracles as they're able to continue their broadcasts across the country.
Thanks to the Lord, and this is one of miracles that some of those radio stations they were restored, yeah. And in spite of all of those problems that we had or have right now, our broadcasters are committed to our ministry. So we proclaim good news about the Jesus at every place we are right now. So I am in Kiev, in our capital. Our broadcasters there in Western Ukraine or in different parts of Ukraine, but they find the ways, they find new studios, and they use those facilities in order to proclaim Jesus right now, because that's extremely important in this time of disorientation, fear, calamity, and so on. And I could tell you that people are very, very open now.
And Sergei says their staff, as well as himself, are seizing unprecedented opportunities to share their faith in the midst of such despair in their country. Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
6 Alberta men recently dropped everything to put their lives on the line to help with search and rescue missions in Ukraine. These brave men are part of a volunteer operation called the Canadian International Rescue Organization. The men, mainly from Central Alberta, range in age from 23 to 61. The organization's public information officer, Chad Reed, says their group is helping to train others in rescue techniques and even brought specialized cameras and listening gear with them to help search for people buried in the rubble.
They are telescopic, so we're able to extend them down into confined spaces as far as the telescope will allow us. We can converse through the camera as well as see what's going on. So it's lit up. We can get a 360-degree view of what's going on in that space. And if we are able to make contact, they can talk back through the camera, and we can have live footage of what's going on in that space. So, for a casualty, I'm sure you can imagine that somebody in a confined space like this, and now they're able to get communication, would be staggering. So.
Reid says the group plans to leave the equipment behind in Ukraine when they return back home to Canada. You can catch more of that interview with BCN's Jeanette Rocher and our BCN Weekend Edition coming up. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, like many other Canadians, has a serious problem with the Liberals-NDP coalition. The two parties formed a partnership to keep the Liberals in power until the year 2025. Thomas says there are a number of ideologies the NDP want to bring forward that should be of great concern to Canadians.
National pharmacare, including dental. Abolishing billionaires, killing energy, natural gas, oil development, defunding the police and the RCMP, saying no to the monarchy, a guaranteed basic income, pulling Canada out of NATO. Wow, pulling Canada out of NATO. That is one of the things that the NDP would like to do. Oppose privatization in all its forms. Make sure that there's a guaranteed basic income for every single Canadian. Eliminate the Canadian Armed Forces and make illegal drugs legal.
The federal Conservatives blasted the Trudeau Liberals on not offering more support to Canada's energy sector, support that would have been used to help those who need more Canadian oil and gas. Calgary MP Stephanie Kuzy says the federal government needs to apologize for its short-sightedness.
This NDP Liberal government has spent the last 7 years destroying the natural resources sector. Suddenly, after a world fuel crisis, they recognize the necessity of ethically produced oil and gas and have promised an extra 300,000 barrels per day. Bad news for this government. Due to their destruction of the sector and denying pipelines from being built, Canada will struggle to fill this demand. Okay. So when will this NDP Liberal government apologize to Ukrainians, apologize to Europeans, and apologize to Canadians for being so short-sighted? Madam Speaker.
The current situation in Ukraine underscores the importance of energy security of our allies in Europe and around the world, and our country is in a secure position in terms of energy supply. As Europe needs to address the geopolitical and socioeconomic challenges presented by the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, we're considering all measures to preserve energy supply chains in Canada and around the world. Madam Speaker, as the situation in Europe changes, we are working to ensure reliable energy supply to our allies in Europe, around the world, and it's recognized that we are doing the work necessary.
There is a group calling itself It Starts Right Now that's in the business of nominating pro-life candidates to become elected officials. Alyssa Golob is with the organization and has more detail as to what they're all about.
Well, our organization is solely focused on nominating and electing pro-life candidates. And this is very different from other pro-life organizations because for the past few decades, groups have basically focused on street activism, the life chain holding signs up on the road, or the March for Life doing rallies on Parliament Hill. But there have been very few organizations that have focused on the electoral process.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Alyssa Golob with the pro-life group It Starts Right Now coming up in the second half of our program. The federal government says it is committing $2 billion to provinces to help clear up surgical backlogs caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos says the newly tabled Bill C-17 will follow a $4 billion top-up to the federal health transfer last summer. It's expected to be a one-time payment.
In addition to the $4 billion for backlogs announced in March 2021, today's announcement will help repair the damage caused to our healthcare system by the pandemic. It is also setting us on the longer-term path towards ensuring that our healthcare system can meet the structural and demographic challenges of the 21st century. In order to do this, we will want to work collaboratively with our provincial and territorial partners and focus on the needs of patients and the achievements of concrete outcomes.
Throughout the pandemic, a number of hospitals across the country had to delay a number of procedures to make way for urgent COVID-19 cases. Canada's largest private sector union alleges its former national president accepted tens of thousands of dollars from a supplier of COVID-19 rapid test kits he promoted to employers of union members. Unifor says Jerry Diaz is being charged with violating the Code of Ethics and democratic practices of the union's constitution following an internal investigation.
In December 2021 and January 2020, Diaz promoted a supplier's rapid test kits to various Unifor employers, either directly or through Unifor staff under his direction. Several employers of Unifor members purchased those test kits. At some point prior to January 20th, 2022, Diaz accepted the sum of $50,000 from the supplier. On January 20th, Diaz gave a Unifor employee what Diaz says was half of those funds, $25,000, telling the employee that it had come from the supplier. The employee subsequently filed a complaint under the Unifor Code of Ethics and delivered the funds he had received from Diaz to me as National Secretary Treasurer.
Well, we had a slightly cooler day in the Windy City today, but a lovely weekend is shaping up. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we could possibly see, close to 20 degrees by Sunday?
Yeah, very close. Hell, a high of 18 degrees is actually expected on Sunday. 11 degrees on Saturday. Should be a pretty nice weekend. Keep in mind, though, we're still seeing overnight low this evening of -3, so maybe still a little too early to put the plants out on the deck. All in all, though, should be a lovely weekend. I'll tell you how the rest of the week is shaping up later on in the newscast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Auditor General released a report which confirmed that there were grant discrepancies with Arches and the supervised consumption site here in Lethbridge. The findings revealed that the former NDP government removed accountability and oversight, and that there were a number of shortcomings in how grants to Arches were handled by Alberta Health. In March of 2020, following a provincial audit, the government eliminated future funding following concerns about unaccounted for grants. The Lethbridge Police Service is partnering with Alberta Health Services in our city to help out those who are battling mental health and addictions issues. An LPS constable is paired with a mental health therapist from AHS to service high-risk clients. The program, which began in 2018, is called the Police and Crisis Team. Now, last year, a second PAC team was added to allow more clients access to the program. LPS Constable Derek Williamson says between November of 2021 and February of this year, a total of 215 files were handled as compared to just 64 through the same time a year earlier.
I believe that the numbers shot up. At the end of the day, these were mental health calls that we had to deal with, and probably those numbers didn't change much, but the difference being that patrol officers are no longer dealing with those calls. They're being diverted to the PAC team. So myself and my partners, Constable Tyler Boris and Sid Wolf and Marco Ander, were able to take those calls and divert them away from patrols to allow them to deal with other higher priority incidents.
The Health IM digital platform will launch later this spring and will provide officers with a pre-response safety briefing and support their assessment on whether a person should be transported to a designated facility for evaluation. The province announced that beginning next month, Albertans will be getting a new area code. The new number will be 368. It is expected to come into circulation on April the 23rd. The new area code will be added to the existing 4 area codes, which are 403, 780, 587, and 825. Now, the first area code, 403, was introduced back in 1947, with 780 being brought on board in 1999. There will soon be a new way to get around in the city of Lethbridge. Starting in April, e-bikes and e-scooters will be gliding across the Windy City. BCN's Micah Quinn has details on the 2-year pilot project.
We'll work very closely with the city to ensure that this is a successful pilot so that then it turns into a long-term program.
Ankush Karwal, the regional manager and head of Canada for Neuromobility, says the company started in Canada in July of 2021, and now there are e-bikes and e-scooters in Red Deer, Calgary, Vernon, and Ottawa. Lethbridge is the newest city to bring the program in after City Council gave it the go-ahead.
We launched with 250 e-scooters and only 50 e-bikes. Then depending upon the reaction, when everything sort of stabilizes a little bit, then we'll start expanding our fleet further.
Finding a ride is simple, and all you have to do is download the Neuron app. Single rides will cost $1.15 to unlock, and then 35 cents a minute to ride.
Once your account's set up, for the first-time users, you'll have to go through some videos on how to ride, where to ride, the rules that are there in Lethbridge, and then open up your app, find your closest, nearest scooter or e-bike, scan the QR code, and off you go. Helmets are not mandatory in Lethbridge, but we do recommend wearing helmets while you're riding.
Carwell says last year in Red Deer, 38% of Neuron trips replaced car rides, and 52% of the riders used the service to commute to and from work. In Calgary, 80% of the riders used the scooters to go to restaurants and explore the city. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
I can't wait to get my hands on one of those e-scooters. Scotiabank has signed a check for $150,000 for Lethbridge College's Ready to Connect program. It's a new initiative the college has put together that helps high school students from disadvantaged or underrepresented populations transition into post-secondary. An official with the college says the money will go directly to the students that the program is supporting.
Lethbridge College provides the supports in terms of the activities the students will be participating in to enhance what they're learning in the classroom. We also will facilitate the mentorship opportunities by drawing on Scotiabank employees or Lethbridge College alumni who had similar experiences to the students entering this program, and allow them to meet with people who can help them navigate that process and really overcome some of the barriers they might face.
The college will be able to support about 20 students with intake beginning this September. A local artist is giving back to those in Ukraine by selling her paintings with the money from the artwork being donated to the Red Cross. Linda McFalls, a retired nurse of 43 years, says she wanted to do her part as an artist and give back to those who've been solely affected by the tragedy. McFalls explains the idea behind her paintings, and she says she felt affected by one mass destruction that took place in Ukraine.
Sunflowers are the flower of the country, and the sunflower represents peace and solidarity, so I thought it was pretty fitting. And in my paintings, you can see kind of drips that I've put in, and those represent tears because of the strife that's happening in that country. As a person, you want justice for people, but what really hit me hard was I was watching the news and saw that a maternity hospital had been bombed, and that really hit me because just 4 weeks ago, my son and daughter-in-law had a newborn baby, and I thought, oh, that could have been my family, and I just felt so empathetic towards those people. That must be so terrible there.
McFall says one painting has already been sold, with 4 left available for people to purchase. The 11th annual Coaldale Family Fun Run gets underway next month. Now, this year's event will be held both virtually and in person. An official with the event says $2 from each entry will be going to a couple of Christian ministries that support people with disabilities.
We thought that that was a worthy cause. They're also struggling coming out of COVID because, of course, the past several years, they have also had a lot of problems with fundraising. So we thought that we would give our $2 to them this year.
We held close to some seasonal temperatures for this time of year, but for the weekend, it'll feel more like summer. Complete weather details are coming up. We had another lovely spring-like day here in Lethbridge, and a beautiful weekend is also shaping up. Jeanette Rocher is here now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it may be a great time to pull out the barbecue out Saturday and maybe Sunday?
Yeah, definitely a good time for that, Hal, as we will be seeing double-digit temperatures this weekend, 11 degrees the high on Saturday. Not as much wind either, only about 15 kilometers per hour. So that must be a sure tell sign that spring is here when you're getting those warmer temperatures without all that crazy wind. High of 18 degrees on Sunday, mix of sun and cloud, back down to 10 on Monday, still double digits. So, we can be happy about that for our Monday. Into Tuesday, high of 9, lots of sunshine, 16 the high on Wednesday. Wednesday night that we're going to be seeing a chance of showers overnight. Into Thursday, those showers could possibly turn into some flurries, unfortunately. 9 degrees the high on Thursday, but that's still days away. That could always change by then. 8 degrees is our average high for this time of year. Average low, -5. 20 degrees was where we were at on this day back in 1999, and in 1955 we were at -27. 7:24 is when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening, 7:51 p.m., giving us 12 hours and over 20, almost 12 and a half hours of daylight. I'm loving it. Showers expected on the west coast, 10 degrees the high in Victoria tomorrow with some rain showers as well in Vancouver. 11 degrees the high there, -2 the high in Edmonton. Edmonton seeing a chance of flurries tomorrow. 10 degrees the high in Calgary with sunshine and 20 km/h winds. As we look to the rest of the prairies, -5 in Saskatoon, mix of sun and cloud. Partly cloudy skies in Regina tomorrow, -1 the high, -11 the high in Winnipeg. A little chilly there with sunshine. 30 to 50 km/h winds also expected in Winnipeg, so could feel a little bit of that wind chill as well. 6 degrees the high in Toronto. Toronto seeing a mix of flurries and rain. Not the greatest weather there. 6 degrees also in Ottawa as well with rain showers. Showers also expected tomorrow in Montreal with a high of 7 degrees. As we look further east into the Maritimes, Fredericton expecting some showers tomorrow, 10 degrees the high. Lots of sunshine in both Halifax and Charlottetown tomorrow. Halifax high 12, Charlottetown sitting at 10. 5 degrees tomorrow in St. John's. They're looking at ice pellets, could be changing to rain. Flurries, could be a little bit of everything in the precipitation department tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland. 5 degrees the high there. There you have it. That is your forecast.
The federal government's deficit in the first 10 months of the 2021-2022 fiscal year was less than a third of what it was for the same period in 2020. The Finance Department says the deficit for April through January was $75.3 billion. That was down from a deficit of $268.2 billion in the same period a year earlier. As for revenue, it was up 33% to $314.2 billion, while program expenses declined by 24% to $360.2 billion. The U.S. and European Union announced a new partnership to reduce Europe's reliance on Russian oil and gas. The White House says this agreement will further isolate Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. Under the plan, the United States and other countries will increase liquefied natural gas exports to Europe by 15 billion cubic meters this year, with larger shipments in the future. At the same time, the EU will try to keep their climate goals on track by powering gas infrastructure with clean energy and reducing methane leaks. Farmers on the prairies are still feeling the effects of last year's drought. Now, that's according to Lynn Jacobson, president of the Alberta Federation of Agriculture. Jacobson says if producers don't see a lot of moisture this spring, it could be bad news for many of us.
There's probably 40 or 50 producers in, I guess, southern Alberta, maybe in Saskatchewan, that are really in dire straits at this point in time. And those people have been telling the Hay West coordinators that if they don't get any feed supply on that, they're going to have to liquidate their herds.
Catch the full interview with Lynn Jacobson and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our program. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 68 points on the day to 22,006. The Dow was up 153 points to 34,861. The S&P 500 was up 22 points to 4543, and the Nasdaq was down 22 points on the day to 14,169. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 39 cents to $112.73 US. Natural gas was up 15 cents to $5.55 US. Gold was up 61 cents to $19.58.30 US an ounce, and silver was down a cent to $25.53 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $13.47 per bushel, barley's at $9.80, canola's at $24.89, and corn is at $11.99 per bushel. Live cattle were up 80 cents to $140.48, feeder cattle were down 35 cents to $156.43, and lean hogs were up $4.70 to $107.48. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 80.15 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the federal government says it is committing $2 billion to provinces to help clear up surgical backlogs caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos says the newly tabled bill will allow a $4 billion top-up to the federal health transfer last summer. It's expected to be a one-time payment. There's a powerful group of pro-lifers who make it their mission to have other pro-lifers run for public office. Alyssa Golub from the organization It Starts Right Now will have details for us shortly. But first, here's some special events taking place in and around southwestern Alberta.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Discover unique gift ideas at the Old Man River Potters Guild Annual Spring Sale, taking place April 28th and 29th from noon to 8 p.m. and the 30th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. See what local pottery artists have been creating: mugs, planters, decor, dishware, and so much more. The spring sale is at the Potters Guild Studio and Gallery at 4416 First Avenue South. For more information about the Guild and classes that they offer, visit oldmanriverpottersguild.com. The Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is looking for volunteers to take part in their Drive Happiness program. This program is to help seniors in our community who are facing extreme loneliness due to lack of accessible transportation. Volunteers will drive clients to their medical appointments, pick up groceries, and take them to important life activities. If you're interested in this opportunity and for more information, call 403-332-4320 or email volunteer@volunteerlethbridge.com.
We often read headlines that say abortion is a settled issue here in Canada, but is it really? There's still a large number of Canadians who are opposed to the termination of a tiny unborn being with a heartbeat. Is there any realistic hope of changing the majority's view on the issue? Today's guests believe there is. Alyssa Galobe is one of the co-founders of Right Now, a Canadian pro-life organization, and she joins us now from Calgary. Alyssa, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
So Alyssa, what is your organization all about, and how do you differ from other pro-life groups?
Well, our organization is solely focused on nominating and electing pro-life candidates. And this is very different from other pro-life organizations because for the past few decades, groups have basically focused on street activism, you know, the life chain holding signs up on the road, or the March for Life doing rallies on Parliament Hill. But there have been very few organizations that have focused on the electoral process. Other organizations focus on lobbying politicians after they're already elected. But what in our research with myself and my co-founder, Scott Hayward, of our organization is that we can make the most amount of difference, especially in the nomination process. And so we started this organization to focus solely on that area.
So what kind of success have you had so far in nominating pro-life politicians?
We've had a lot of success. We started in 2016, and one of our first politicians that we helped in the nomination process was 19-year-old Sam Osterhoff in Ontario, who was an ardent social conservative who went up against the president of the party. And no one knew who he was. Very few people paid attention to him. Everyone thought it was going to be a landslide victory of the president of the party, but he ended up winning because social conservatives and pro-life voters got involved. They bought their nominations and they showed up and supported Sam. So we often use that as an example just of how powerful the pro-life vote can be in the nomination process.
Now, political parties are obviously very aware of what you're doing right now and who you are. What kind of tactics are they using to maybe try and stop your message and really stop you in your tracks here?
Well, it all depends on who the leader is, because if we do have a sympathetic leader or even one who's pro-life that we've seen in the past, they very much respect democracy. They respect open nomination process. We've also had terrible leaders provincially where they disqualify candidates the night before if they don't like what they're saying and for no reason at all. So it's been kind of a whirlwind in terms of who we elect and how successful we are in terms of the leader. But, you know, in the last two federal elections, which is the two that we've been around for in our existence, we've actually been able to increase the number of pro-life politicians both in 2019 and 2021. So the Conservative Federal Party is far more pro-life now than it was 5 years ago, and we only expect to continue that success.
Now, in your recent research, Alyssa, what percentage of the population do you think is actually against abortion? And how many of these people would potentially consider getting involved politically?
Yeah, so recent polls, the last major poll was done by Angus Reid in 2020, and it showed that 34% of Canadians thought life began at conception. And so in a country of 38 million people, that's about 12 million Canadians who are pro-life. In terms of where they fall on the pro-life spectrum, the same poll also showed that the majority of Canadians want restrictions on abortion in every single province, including Atlantic Canada and Quebec, which are seen as more of the kind of progressive provinces. So this is a unanimous thing that Canadians do want, and the legislature, especially federally, has to keep up with the public opinion on this issue.
So what kind of legislation would you like to see changed? Many political parties, including the Conservative Party of Canada, has already said it's a non-starter and abortion will remain.
Yeah, so I think, again, that public policy has to reflect public opinion. And so if the majority of Canadians want restrictions on abortion, and the Supreme Court in our versus Morgentaler said it was up to the federal legislature to implement these laws, then it's our duty as Canadians, as voters, to elect politicians that will reflect that policy and will pass legislation. And that's really what the goal of the game that we play is that to elect those politicians that do reflect that public policy. And so even in the Conservative Party, some leaders have said, we won't reopen the debate, but every single time there's a leader that says that, there have been multiple backbench MPs which have put forward different types of legislation. And we see the support for that legislation growing and growing each year.
So in your opinion, what are the odds of seeing a pro-life federal Conservative leader being elected? Any word yet on any pro-life candidates, such as maybe Leslyn Lewis, who's an outspoken social conservative running?
Yeah, I'm absolutely confident that a pro-life leader will run, and I'm very hopeful that it will be Leslyn Lewis. She hasn't announced yet, but the signs are there. And if that's the case, then to me, it's really a make or break time in the Conservative Party, because they can continue to elect kind of the establishment candidate that's been around for decades, that has the same talking points and the same message and the same sole focus on economic issues and not touch anything cultural. Or we can go in a new direction with a new leader, a fresh perspective, no hidden agenda, someone who can actually win in the GTA and different suburban parts of Canada, and who also has that conservative policy that I think so many Canadians are in search of.
Now, for any viewers, Alyssa, who might be watching this program right now and thinking about getting involved politically in some fashion, what would you say to them? Like, which areas do you need help in specifically?
Well, like I said, this leadership race is very important. So even if we put together lists of personal pro-life contacts that we know, and reach out to them during the leadership race and ask them to buy a membership to support the pro-life leadership candidate, that can exponentially increase the number of votes, and that's the number of points that a pro-life leader needs to win. And just also to join our organization so we can let you know when there's a pro-life candidate in your riding, so you can vote in that nomination, and we can elect more and more pro-life politicians across the country.
It's interesting to see polling revealing that a majority of Canadians are in fact opposed to gender-selective abortions and late-term abortions. Now, why is it that legislation to this effect never actually gets past first base?
I think it's mostly because the pro-life movement hasn't focused in this area of electing pro-life candidates as much as we've needed to. So even though our numbers keep increasing in Parliament, we still don't have enough to pass pro-life legislation, which is ultimately the goal. The goal is to elect 170 pro-life MPs, which is 51%, so we can pass these types of pro-life bills, especially bills that reflect public policy. So I think that in many of these situations, even though support for these bills has increased over the last few years, it's not enough to pass in the House, and that's what we're fighting for.
Now, there are many who believe that opposition to abortion is simply coming from the Christian fundamentalists. Is this true, or are there other groups championing the pro-life cause?
I mean, the majority of New Canadians hold social conservative values, and each party recognizes that this is a large voter base that parties need to win, especially in the GTA. And often people think, GTA, Toronto, they think progressive, you have to be as red as possible, as liberal as possible. But the truth is we're not talking about downtown Toronto. We're talking about all the different communities. I lived in Toronto for 10 years. I know all the different communities, all the thousands of churches that are in that area. And those are the people that we can really target, who hold these views, and intensify them so that it crosses over to who they vote for politically. So I think that this is an easy and low-hanging fruit of a population to actually get them to vote for our issues, because they're issues that are dear to their heart. And so I think that that's really what we're going to focus on in the future.
So it's more the 905, not the 416 that we're talking about. You know, it could be maybe the Durham region, it could be out, you know, Port Perry somewhere, or maybe Binbrook out by Hamilton, that area. So not so much Toronto Centre, like right in the middle there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, those downtown Toronto ridings only are, you know, a few ridings in 338. So the majority of them are kind of outside the downtown core, and those are really where new Canadians tend to go. Even in Vancouver, which you know, we had a lot of success in the 2019 federal election. We won the majority of those swing ridings there, and we elected pro-life candidates. So in these different areas, we have had success, and we will continue to do so because those are where, you know, a lot of pro-lifers live.
Now, I understand that you see abortion as more of a human rights issue. Can you explain?
Well, like I said, you know, because there are so many different people with so many different backgrounds and, you know, religious denominations, abortion is a human rights issue. It's not necessarily a religious issue, even though many religious people hold this view. But in our organization, we have dealt with and have so many different supporters from all walks of life. And the fact is that you don't need to be religious to understand that scientifically abortion kills a human being, and that you want that to stop in Canada. And that's really the message that we focus on, and we deal with how we can do that politically in our country.
So let's say the Conservative Party of Canada elects its new leader, maybe Jean Charest, it could be Pierre Poilievre, or maybe Leslyn Lewis. But let's say the new leader happens to be pro-choice. How are you going to work with that leader to help further your cause?
I think the same way we have done, you know, with the last leader, in that we've just focused on nominating in the nomination process. Many of these leaders, although they hold the pro-choice or pro-abortion perspective, do respect the democratic process of the nominations. And so we're able to intensify people in different ridings that we're focused on and get them involved and vote and win in those nominations. So even with a, you know, ardently pro-abortion leader like Erin O'Toole, we were able to increase the number of pro-life politicians in the last election. And if that happens in the future, we'll continue to focus on that area.
So any advice on how to better identify pro-life voters and to gather them together cohesively to influence our nation?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways. Social media is a huge help. We also have door knocking campaigns where we ask people to sign a pro-life petition, so we can sort of gauge where they're at in the neighborhoods that we need. You know, going into different churches, church presentations where people are generally pro-life but don't understand how that translates politically. We also do presentations just to communities and different ridings that we're focused on. So there's lots of different ways that people can help educate you know, the community that they're in and intensify people's votes so that they can nominate and elect a pro-life candidate in the future if they haven't already.
So, Alyssa, I want to ask you specifically and personally, how did you get involved and why do you have a passion for being a pro-lifer?
Well, I really started getting involved in my teen years when I saw a picture of an abortion victim photography, and that kind of stuck with me. And then throughout university, I was pro-life and I was involved in different campaigns. And then right out of university, I decided to work full-time in the pro-life movement, not really understanding how vast it is in all the different areas. And so the very first place that I started out was a crisis pregnancy center, volunteering every day. And so we would deal with abortion-minded women who were set on having abortions, but might have changed their mind at the last minute or realized that there were other choices or other options for them that we provided. And that really intensified my pro-life stance. And it's one of the driving reasons behind why I do what I do politically today.
So what do you say to somebody who says to you, look, this is my body, my choice? How do you approach that conversation?
Well, a lot of people who say that, when they find out, when you ask them why they made that choice, you know, the number one thing that they say is, I thought I had no other choice. So I think providing people with other options and having more informed consent is a big part of that because, I'm all for my body, my choice. But if abortion was solely about a woman's body, she'd be aborting herself. But she's not. She's aborting a separate individual human being with separate DNA. But I think the real kind of way to explain that is to show that there are other choices. And when women are faced with real choices that actually help them, then they vastly don't go with abortion.
Alyssa Golob is one of the co-founders of Right Now, a Canadian pro-life organization. Thanks so much for joining us today from Calgary.
Thanks for having me.
With the drought conditions that prevailed over much of Alberta last year, it was a challenging season for ag producers across our province. So how did farmers fare and what are things looking like for them this upcoming season? Well, joining me to discuss this is Lynn Jacobson. He farms near Enchant in southern Alberta and is also president of the Alberta Federation of Agriculture. Lynn, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So, Lynn, tell me, how bad was last year's drought for Alberta farmers across the province? Did we see any operations hit so hard that they were forced to quit or to sell?
Yeah, no, the conditions in Alberta last year varied depending on the region you were in. So not all the province was in as dire straits as other parts of the province. The breakdown for the province probably is in southern Alberta, where I'm located right now, was probably some of the driest parts of Alberta, and going in. And then as you went farther north and you got up towards the Red Deer, Lacombe, Edmonton, Three Hills areas, they had better conditions and growing conditions. They received more rainfall over the year, and they turned out in them areas maybe to having half a crop in some areas, or maybe 75% of the crop, depending on if they picked up rains or not. Then you moved over to the eastern part of the province, and then it turned drier again. And a lot of those people in some of those areas, maybe they only got a quarter of the crop that they were expecting. And then you get into the Peace River country, which was really dry to begin with. And then it started raining in some of those areas up there. But as I mentioned earlier, the worst part basically was the southern Alberta region. And we really did not receive any significant rainfall over the whole year.
Right. So so how bad was it for southern Alberta producers? And were there any specific areas that were hit harder in southern Alberta than others?
Yeah. Well, I could pick up one of our, and I guess our area around the Enchant area, Lomond, Milo areas, which is north of Lethbridge. Basically, the dry land acreage in this area, I guess yields ran from non-existent to maybe 14 or 15 bushel an acre, depending on your cropping patterns and what you did. Like our normal cropping, I guess, average in this area on dry land is around 30 to 35 bushel an acre. It has gone up a lot better. When we get some rain. Year before that, yields were sitting around 60 to 85 bushel an acre on dry land. Now, there's also the irrigation in our area too, and our farm has a lot of irrigation on it. So we're sort of a mixed community or mixed farming area with the irrigation and the dry land. And the irrigation, it was hurt somewhat from the heat, and that we were still, we come up with a fairly decent crop.
Okay, so where are we at right now with current moisture levels then? So if we don't have a wet spring, for example, are we going to be in trouble?
Yes, southern Alberta especially. There's been varying amounts of snowfall over this area. The Carson area, which is deep south and more to the west, has got more snow than we have. You get up into the Lethbridge area and then over to us towards the Enchant area, and then even into the Lomond area too.
My goodness. So what effect has this drought had on beef producers, for example?
Yeah. Well, We're part of the Hay West program, which we started up, and I think a lot of your agriculture producers will be aware of that. That's through the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. We started the initiative in bringing hay into southern Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Now, we're getting calls, and this is what we directly know from a report we had last week with the Hay West program. There's probably 40 or 50 producers in, I guess, southern Alberta, maybe even Saskatchewan, that are really in dire straits at this point in time. And those people have been telling the Hay West coordinators that if they don't get any feed supply on that, they're going to have to liquidate their herds. There will be other people that'll be a little bit better off, but if they don't have any rainfall, significant rainfall going into spring, that's still going to cause a problem because there won't be much, top growth and grass, and that as we go forward. And that, again, is subject to regions like around the Waterton area and that area. Last year, they had pretty good rains and significant. When you got farther to the east, then it started drying out quite a bit. And a lot of farmers really did, or a lot of ranchers did not have adequate supplies to carry them through the winter. In fact, you're seeing ads now in the paper for people advertising, can you spare a couple bales, or can you spare half a load of hay, to people that maybe have had adequate reserves for their own and getting closer to spring feel that they can maybe, sell some of that hay.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so this has really had an effect on the supply. And would it affect the cost of feed as well?
Oh yeah, the cost of feed has gone up. It's just like everything else. Hay is probably, ahead of the game on everything else because of the dry conditions and that spillover, on the effect of prices on that. So hay has been very expensive, for quite a while. And I know some people, it's hard to justify, but when you've got cattle that are ready to calve and things like this, and you need something to do, unless you're going to sell those animals, they're going to have to pay a price basically to feed those animals. So it is a dire situation for people. And I would suggest the people that are probably the most likely to liquidate their herds are going to be the older producers. If you're in your 50s or older than your 50s, if you've got to start cutting your herd down and then the rebuilding process, if you want to retain, is not immediate. You can't go out there and buy back or you can't build it back up your herd to what you thought or thought you should have with your genetics and that. So it's probably about a 5 to 10 year process to bring you back to where you were once you get you downsize quite significantly. So this is going to have an effect. We can see, and we're hearing about, the older producers in the cattle industry are saying, once I've liquidated down to a certain point where I've liquidated my herd, I'm probably not going to get back into the business again.
My goodness. Ugh. Now, Lynn, obviously, topic of conversation the past week or so has been the war in Ukraine. What are you hearing from the ag community with regard to the war in the Ukraine? They've been traditionally one of the biggest grain suppliers for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. So will this create a new export market, and could it drive up prices here?
Well, I guess to break it down, we talked about the war and the effects it was going to have on agriculture at the CFA meeting among ourselves as delegates. And this is going to affect all of Canada. Basically, are all Canadian producers. What we're seeing, I guess, with the Ukraine and Russia with the war, how is that going to affect their production? And a lot of their large areas of Ukraine that actually are producing, or agriculture producers, are in the regions that are, under attack right now or are very close to. But it's not only if those producers in Ukraine and can't get the inputs that they need with fuel and fertilizer and some of the weed sprays and their seed, So this could have a very dramatic effect on what they're going to produce this year, for sure. Russia, not so sure how that's going to work out. But you take Ukraine out of the equation, and they are the larger producer of that region. It's going to have a significant effect on, on world prices and world supply. And Ukraine supplied markets that we have supplied in the past, but they still filled in a large part of that demand. What it really means if they're cut off, there's going to be more demand for products out of North America and other regions of production.
I was going to ask, so if the war continues and if we have another drought, how could this end up affecting Canadian consumers, like at the grocery store checkout? Do you think it's going to drive it up that way?
Well, it already has. I think people are already complaining about grocery prices. And yes, it has the potential to drive it farther and prices increases even more. But there is some anomalies within that pricing system too within Canada of large profits for large corporations like Loblaws is something like up about 400% on their profitability this year. So I think there's going to be a hard look at basically at the profitability of some of the larger corporations for suppliers of groceries and that as we go through this year. Another thing that's really starting to look and happen is people are looking at local food production and what they can do in that area already. They're talking about it. And also food waste, and maybe, there's going to be more of a demand. People are looking at, maybe not having that perfect vegetable sitting on their table. They may be looking at some blemishes on some of the product, but we have that food waste, which is 8 or 10% of the food that comes into this country already. So I think that there's going to be a hard look at that and how that is going to be handled too.
Wow. Are ag producers responding to the increased costs with carbon taxes? And now, of course, gas is going through the roof as well as oil. How are ag producers responding to all of this?
Well, I guess the usual practice was last fall, and we always were buying our products, in the fall. So we lay on our supplies of fertilizer and some of the weed sprays and chemicals that we need and the other input costs that we need in the fall. I think there was quite a few producers have locked in or maybe have taken delivery of at least their fertilizer for the spring coming up. But there will be a certain segment of the population that was thinking, okay, we'll maybe do it just before Christmas or the end of their cropping year, what they were looking at. And I know there was some people were thinking, well, the price is too high right now. There's a chance of it maybe going down, so they held off. So if you're in that situation, you are paying way more than you would have say, if you bought your supplies before the start of the year. But one of the things too that we're sort of hearing is some of the fertilizer companies are saying, well, you may have bought your product and that, but we're not guaranteeing you delivery of your product. So that's a big worry for some people.
Oh, big time. Absolutely. Lynn, it does look like we are about out of time, but I thank you so much for joining us today from Enchant in Southern Alberta. And you gave me a little geography lesson before on to where exactly Enchant is, so I appreciate that.
Okay, it was nice talking to you.
Thank you. Lynn Jacobson is the president of the Alberta Federation of Agriculture. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.